Hello and welcome to News Centre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The first week of COP29 has concluded with no headway on climate finance. As per economists, developing countries need at least $1 trillion annually by the end of the decade to cope with climate change. However, negotiators are yet to agree on new annual finance targets and who should pay. In a statement on behalf of like-minded developing nations, India criticized developed countries for failing to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 and extending the deadline to 2025. India also accused the West of shifting goalposts and delaying climate action. Meanwhile, the UN climate chief, Simon Stiell, urged G20 members to support an increase in grants, loans and debt relief to vulnerable nations. Joining us right now to discuss this is Sumant Sinha, founder, chairman and CEO of ReNew. Sumant Sinha was recently recognized as a global climate leader in 2024 Time 100 climate list. He has been an advocate for policies necessary to advance the energy transition as well. Mr. Sinha, thank you very much for joining us and many congratulations on the honor. Let me begin by asking you, India has been expressing very strong dissatisfaction and anger with the manner in which negotiations have progressed at COP29 in Baku. Do you get a sense that this COP is going to end without any enhanced financial commitments?
Yeah, hi, Parikshit. Thank you so much for having me on the show and thank you for those kind words. Look, I think this COP has always been a little bit in a difficult spot. First of all, with respect to the location, which is Azerbaijan, which is an oil and gas producing country, with not a lot of heft globally, economically, to make various countries come together. And secondly, the participation at this COP has also not been very high right from the beginning, both from the private sector side as well as a lot of global leaders. So I think that this whole agreement of this new collective quantified goals of trying to get $1 trillion of funding from developed countries to developing countries has always been a little bit fraught with difficulty. And the reason is what qualifies as actually a contribution. Is it government capital only? Is it private capital as well that comes from the developed countries to the developing countries? How should that be measured? What about capital that comes in from the multilateral entities like the World Bank and so on? Should that also be counted as part of this whole thing? So the whole thing about counting a lot of this, and what sources it comes from, to get all that agreed was always going to be very difficult, frankly. Now, I think just given also before COP started, obviously, Trump won the election in the US. And so there was this whole thing about the fact that is this becoming in some ways a lame duck COP itself. And so I think all of these factors are sort of weighing on this whole COP negotiations. And that is why perhaps it's not yet led to any constructive outcomes. But let me also say this, that things always look very bad before there is an agreement. And so in some ways, we are just in the middle of COP right now. I think we have to wait for things to play themselves out for the balance of this week before we see exactly where we get to.
Right. You spoke about Trump being in the White House. Do you see this as a setback for platforms such as the COP, the Paris Agreement as well?
I think it's a setback for climate change efforts globally, regardless of whether you just look at the COPs or not. The reality is that, if the largest economy in the world, which accounts for 20% of all the economic growth and is the second largest carbon emitter, suddenly pulls out of an agreement like this, or out of, essentially says that climate change is not something that we are going to be contributing to, then that's obviously a very negative for the rest of the countries that are trying to do their best. And you've already seen that Argentina, for example, has also pulled out their negotiators from COP as well. So I hope it doesn't snowball into a bigger thing where more and more countries just decide that, COPs as a framework or climate change, in itself is not something that is important enough for them to put effort behind it. I hope it doesn't sort of get to that point. But certainly, regardless of whichever way you look at it, the US being the biggest economy pulling out of climate change conversations is a big negative and a big setback.
Right. How do you see the US approach to the clean energy supply chain agreement with India changing as a result of the new Trump administration and his new cabinet?
Well, Parikshit, there wasn't really any specific agreement per se in terms of the US saying we are going to buy more, let's say, solar equipment from India. The US essentially is trying to prevent imports from Chinese companies manufacturing in China and perhaps now in Southeast Asia as well. And that really gave an opening to Indian companies to start becoming exporters into the US market. But there was no specific as such incentive or desire on the part of the US to benefit Indian companies. Going forward, I think it's unclear to us exactly what is going to happen to solar capacity additions in the US. On the one hand, obviously, with the lack of IRA support, which Trump, as you know, has promised to repeal on day one as he gets into office. If the IRA is not there, then does that mean that capacity additions in the US will fall, which will again, therefore, be a net negative for demand for solar equipment in the US? So that's one aspect of it. But on the other side, if in fact they then squeeze all imports from China, then India then becomes, perhaps the only other place that they can import from. So we'll have to see how the whole series of events comes together in terms of what that means for demand within the US and what that means for their ability to source from China, which then between the two will tell us exactly what that means for supply chain out of India into the US.
Right. Now, with the changes in the White House, in America, and also the slow progress on negotiations on several important fronts at COP29, what does this mean for a company like yours? Would you be holding back investments for a few more months to see how things pan out? Or will the private capex by renewable energy companies continue?
Well, Parikshit, for us, fortunately, we are in a very good spot because we are operating in India. I think the Indian government has taken a very, very clear view that we have to get to 500 gigawatts by 2030. Power demand is growing. Renewables is the cheapest way to meet that power demand growth that is already there. And so for us, we will continue to have investments as we are currently planning right now. As you know, the government over the last 18 months has auctioned close to 80, 90 gigawatts of new capacity. We as a company have won a sizable amount of that. All of that has to be built out by us over the next 3-4 years. So fortunately for us, we don't really see any impact of what's happening globally. I think there could be some impact for solar manufacturing companies, whether it's positive or negative at this point, as I said, for reasons earlier, hard to say. But again, as most of the demand is going to be for us in India, as far as solar equipment is concerned as well. So I don't see that there is going to be any real impact on us based on what's happening globally at this point in time.
And one final question, what is the biggest takeaway from this COP that you would be looking at?
For me, the biggest takeaway, obviously, this is a finance COP. So what happens on that financing goal is obviously very important. But having said that, ultimately, all these countries are coming together and are collectively saying that climate change is fundamental, it's existential, and we all need to come together and do what we can. And this one COP is part of a series of a number of COPs. Various countries have to redefine their NDCs. A lot of that is going to get presented over the course of the next year or so. And so we have to see how that evolves. So for me, the important thing is to see the whole continuum of what's happening, the momentum behind it. And I think this COP has also been an opportunity for everybody to come together, look each other in the eye and say, yes, the US may not be there, but the rest of us are still very committed to taking this whole thing forward. And I think that itself is going to be a very good outcome, potentially, from this COP.
All right, Mr. Sinha, thank you very much for joining us on the program. It's time for a quick break, but don't go anywhere. Minister Ashwini Vaishnav bats for fair compensation for traditional media outlets by the big tech. We will be joined by experts on the other side when we're back.